listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans, and welcome to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and opinions. I'm John, KickedTripod Horseman, and here's your Overwatch League Daily episode for November 29th, 2017. On today's show, welcome to episode 1. I'll tell you exactly what to expect from the show going forward and how to stay in touch. We're only 7 days away from the Overwatch League Preseason in Burbank. I get to chat with the Overwatch League casters and analysts Bren, Seamoose, and Sideshow about the first matchup between the Florida Mayhem and the Philadelphia Fusion. That's what we've got for you for this episode, but first, let me introduce you to the show. When I sought out to create an Overwatch League project, I wanted to make something different, valuable, and sustainable. About a year ago, I tried a project called the Esports Fast Break. It was a weekly rundown of Overwatch esports scores. It was different, it was valuable to a level, but really it wasn't sustainable. For the past few months, I've been brainstorming ideas, and now here we are. So what is Overwatch League Daily? It's pretty simple. It's a 5-day-a-week show dedicated specifically to Overwatch League. I've spent the past few weeks reaching out to the most authoritative sources in Overwatch, and many of them have agreed to contribute regularly. Together, we'll tackle Overwatch League news, scores, and analysis. After that, I'll edit and post the show each morning. Pretty straightforward, right? So where do we go moving forward? It's tough to say. However, your feedback will be invaluable as this format is pretty much untested. There will be ways to improve immediately, and you can be a part of that. Just send in your thoughts and questions to overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com or tweet me at OWLDailyShow. Okay, that's enough. Let's go ahead and get started with the show. The first official Overwatch League preseason match kicks off on Wednesday, December 6th at 4 p.m. Pacific Time and is one of polar opposite approaches to the league. On one side, you have Florida Mayhem aka Misfits. Misfits added Zupa, Swoosh, and Logix in August and will be the only Overwatch League team to sport a 6-man roster. Misfits has done well in competitive Overwatch in the past, and this roster is the same roster that took second place to Team Gigante in Contender Season 1. On the flip side, you have Philadelphia Fusion owned by Comcast Spectacor. The squad is anything but a cohesive unit. The team is represented by 9 different countries and we're on 9 different teams before signing on with Philly. Joining me for this episode to discuss the first match are casters and analysts Brennon, Bren Hook, Josh Sideshow Wilkinson, and Seamus Seamoose Anderson. The first question I asked Bren was what he thought about the Mayhem strategy to sport the smallest roster in the league.
Florida Mayhem, long term, they've got an issue where they've only got 6 men on their roster, like you've already mentioned before. This is going to cause problems for them long term because the league is such a long thing that teams are going to be able to exploit weaknesses that they find in that team very effectively. Of course, there's a mid-season where you can add players, and they might be able to then. But in terms of how long you've got to work out a team and prepare, I should say, for certain matches, that is going to be a weakness. However, because it's the first match that we're talking about here on December the 6th, it's not too much of a disadvantage. We can go off their previous performance. They've got a lot of experience at LAN, a lot of cohesion as well packed into this. They've got the advantage of being able to scrim as a team much longer than some of these Overwatch League teams. With all that considered, I still have to give it to Florida Mayhem. I feel like this is going to be a win on their part. It's going to be a close game, for sure. But I feel like the weaknesses that I highlighted with Florida Mayhem's roster aren't going to be apparent until a bit later on into the league. And eventually, I feel like basically the added experience that they've had because being able to scrim with each other is definitely going to help them overcome and get a win on December the 6th with the preseason games.
With that in mind, I asked Sideshow what he thought about the Fusion's chances to win on December 6th.
Well, it's very difficult to say, isn't it? Philadelphia Fusion are a real unknown quantity. Even though they picked up 3 of the FaZe players, it's really anybody's guess which 6-man roster they're even going to field for this first game in the preseason. Who knows how much time they've had scrimming together as well to try out different strategies and really get a feel for the new meta. Obviously, they had to go through the visa process for a huge amount of their players, a lot of them coming over from Korea or places in Europe as well. And they have to find a team identity. Whereas on the other side, we have majority of Team Sweden, this Misfits roster that have been around for quite a long time, and certainly showed what they were capable of in Contenders. I would say that I have to give it overall to the Florida Mayhem, pretty much just because I have no idea what to expect from Philadelphia Fusion. It is completely true that with only 6 players on their roster, Florida Mayhem may well find themselves in a meta where they'll massively struggle. And you saw them at the bottom of a lot of people's power rankings because they're expecting that to happen without that flexibility on their roster. But they do have very flexible players, and making that assumption that they're going to suddenly find themselves in a meta where they'll utterly fail is a bit of a stretch, in my opinion, because they are incredibly talented. They may not be in a meta where they can possibly win. They may be in a meta where they're floundering a little. I don't think we'll ever see this team towards the bottom. However, when you look at the other side, I think there is a world in which Philadelphia Fusion completely failed to mesh their roster together. Because they're so unknown, the variance is so much larger with what could possibly come out of the Philadelphia Fusion camp. And some of their pickups as well are strange in terms of how they'll utilize them. Eco and Snello, for example, have very similar hero pools to Shadowburn and Carpe, who presumably they're going to be substituted in for at some point. So I'm very interested to see how the Philadelphia Fusion actually manifests. But for the Florida Mayhem, it's going to be continuation of storylines and seeing how they develop.
We've seen in the past that the meta can have a lot to do with what team is on top in competitive Overwatch. So I asked Seamoose what he thought about the meta and how it might affect this matchup.
The meta is looking really diverse right now. The support changes that recently dropped, as well as the inclusion of Moira, enable a lot of different support playstyles. You have a lot of different DPS that are viable. You know, the mainstays of tanks and flex tanks are all still pretty viable. Without having actually seen any competitive play between any team really on this patch, it's hard to gauge which team has the advantage due to the meta and their roster. That being said, though, I still think this is an advantage for the Mayhem because they're a team with developed synergy. They already know what works for them and they know what doesn't. Logix and Tivik are really strong on pretty much the majority of the DPS there, and ultimately they're going to have plenty of time to develop their strategy, and again, they already know what works for them.
So after I got each person's thoughts on the Mayhem, on the Fusion, their chances to win, what some of their advantages and disadvantages are, I pitted a question for them, and I asked them, if you were a coach of one of these teams, what would you be emphasizing in preparation for this next week?
Well, I think for starters that maybe just the next week would be a little too short notice. I hope that they've started their preparation a little earlier than that, but who knows, the Philadelphia Fusion may not have been able to. We've seen some other Overwatch League teams just announced that kind of players are flying in just now, and previously they've been scrimming, you know, with massive ping disadvantages because half of their players are over in Europe. Philadelphia Fusion have actually been pretty quiet on that front as far as I've been able to tell, but certainly if I was a coach for Florida Mayhem, you don't have any extra players to put in. You're thinking long-term throughout the first half of the season at the very least, if the rumors of mid-season signings are correct. You've really got to make sure that these guys aren't going to be scuppered by a patch while still putting them in good stead. So, for me, I think there are a couple... I mean, the weak points of the team for Florida Mayhem, in my opinion, are Swoosh's flexibility. Can he play the Reinhardt? Can he play the Orisa? Can he play stuff like Roadhog if you have to go that route where you're playing double off tanks because there's a... you're playing into a Roadhog Orisa composition or something like that, and there's going to be too much damage onto your Winston player, and you don't want to run a shield comp. So there's an aspect where they need to start putting some attention, I think, and I'm sure they already have. And then also just how their backline functions. Because previously, throughout the whole of Contenders, they were a very aggressive team and never really allowed other people to get too much grip into them. But once Logic started being shut down, we saw some big openings in their backline. And there's another thing as well. Just having your team set up so that you know what to do when Logix is having an off day would be fantastic.
For Florida Mayhem against this team, the advantage they've got coming into this is that they're very flexible. So in the face of adversity, in the face that you don't really know what you're going to be coming up against unless you can basically, have hearsay from different scrims and whatnot, I would say stick to what you know and play what you know well enough, but understand that the fact that they might be trying to focus down Logix, that was the go-to play. So Florida Mayhem, I imagine they've evolved as a team since Contenders, so we're not going to be looking at the same team that kept second place in the Contenders European Finals. However, play what you know, but definitely have a backup plan for when maybe Logix isn't popping off as normally as he does because he's being focused down. That would be what I'd be emphasizing.
Over for the Philadelphia Fusion, I think it would, as I've been saying, come down to nailing this basic style. Working on the fundamentals, making sure you have synergy. Some of these guys, as you said in your intro, have really never played with each other before. I mean, they were intending to have Sado in, I assume, as the main tank to work alongside with Hotba, so that they could have the Korean synergy between the two tanks, which is a massive area where you really need synergy to develop. And Fraggy plays a slightly different style to a lot of main tanks as well. Very aggressive Reinhardt, a kind of unconventional Winston play. So for Poco and Hotba, that's going to be an adjustment when they're playing on the off tanks alongside him. And then again, you've got possibly two completely different calling styles in Joe Meister and Neptuno. I've never played with them, obviously, so that's a little bit of speculation. But the process of tying all these guys together and finding out what the best way to mesh them in is going to be a very long-term thing. And so I don't think Philadelphia Fusion will really be focusing on the preseason at all. They'll just be focusing on making sure that they lay the groundwork for these long-term plans throughout the Overwatch League Season 1.
I definitely say to Philadelphia Fusion, Logix is probably the point, the sort of the chink in the armor, if you like, to focus. Not to say that he's a flawed player in the roster of Florida Mayhem. I actually think that he's one of the best players in Florida Mayhem. For that reason, you want to focus him down and sort of take away one of their star players, because he's very much something that propels forward Florida Mayhem. He allows Tavik to sort of be unleashed a little bit. That's just what I've seen, at least. I think we actually asked Tavik this. We said, do you feel like you can maybe let loose a little bit more now that Logic's on the team? And he said he doesn't feel it's any different. However, I'm going to respectfully disagree with the man himself and say that from looking at the games, Tavik can actually get away with a lot more because Logic is in the game. Now, with these teams, Giganti in particular were essentially, you could immediately tell from watching Contenders in the grand finals, their game plan coming into it was to focus down Logix, and it did work. They ended up coming away with the win in Contenders Season 1 Europe. Apologies for anyone who might not have watched that game and has just been spoiled, but to be fair, the match was some months ago. You should have watched it by now.
For the Fusion, since you have a decent understanding of how each player and the groups of players work together, at this point the roster should probably be finalized, and they should really be looking into maximizing the combination of players that they're going to run. The nice thing is for the Fusion that they know who they're up against, which makes scouting much, much easier. If they're up against, they're up against the Mayhem, which the sixth player is already known. If you're up against Logic's Tracer, they can either choose to circumvent her or just shut down Tavik. And for Tavik himself, most projectile heroes, you might see the fire, but you're probably expecting maybe the Genji or something else. Like, if they have a combination of heroes that they feel has the advantage, without giving the Mayhem swaps that play into what this Mayhem wants, then the Fusion's multiple mana roster might actually have the advantage, just because the Mayhem, they're not actually going to really be able to swap players. They just have to play into the versatility of their guys. Now, that being said, though, the players are versatile themselves, but still.
The last question I asked these guys was who they thought or what they thought the X Factor would be in this match.
The X Factor that I'm interested in, and I think a lot of people are wondering about this for the Fusion specifically, is the Carpe Shadowburn combination. In terms of raw carry potential, it's probably one of the best DPS duos in the actual Overwatch League if it works well together. Shadowburn playing aggressively on Genji enables Carpe on his hit scan heroes, or if Carpe is playing really aggressively, that means Shadowburn can just go ham on pretty much any hero he's played. He's generally known to be a hard carry if he's on a proficient carry role. That being said, though, if Carp is playing aggressively and Shadowburn is on a non-comfort pick or like an off tank that doesn't have carry potential or isn't played around, that would be really good for Mayhem.
For me, if you're going to say an X factor that people should be looking for, I think we've seen most of what we'll now see from Florida Mayhem, if that makes sense. I think they're pretty much a known quantity. We know that Logix is unbelievably sick. We've seen Vic for over a year and a half, be an incredible player, one of the best players in the West. Magnetin has shown that he's got a very capable handle of a lot of off-tank heroes and an ability to adjust to a lot of different roles as well. I think there isn't really an X factor on that team. For me, the X factor, the weird things that are going to come out, the things that might flip people's expectations completely on their head is what happens with Philadelphia Fusion. Because they could be anywhere. They could be a team that comes out and just gets rolled by Florida Mayhem. They could go the other side, have a complete, incredible grasp of the meta and roll them the other way. They're so unknown, and one of the most unknown teams because they didn't just pick up a core, they've kind of picked up a DPS duo from FaZe, where, yes, the FaZe DPS duo have a lot of synergy, but it's not something you really think about as team-defining when you're building outwards. And then they picked up odd pieces in other positions where clearly the coaches have a vision of what they want to do with them, but from the outside looking in, it really is not obvious how they want to utilize these pieces. A lot of players overlap as well, so maybe the coaches are going to send them off to do completely different things. For example, maybe Carpe is going to be the a tracer specialist for this team, while Snello almost leaves the tracer alone and focuses completely on Soldier, where he used to be an absolute beast, because otherwise those guys have pretty similar hero pools. So maybe it goes like they really want to specialize them across. So I think the X factor is going to be what the coaches have cooked up for Philadelphia Fusion. And because we have very few expectations looking at this team, it's difficult really to piece together what the identity could be from what you see on paper. So I'm excited to see that team and how it performs, because on paper it could be really good, but there's a lot of challenges there, I think, in making it as good as its parts would suggest.
So that's it. All three analysts give the nod to Mayhem in the first game, but the Philadelphia Fusion are definitely a team that can upset and win at any point, especially when considering the long term. So what do you think? Can the flexible and talented Fusion roster overcome the competitive pillar of Overwatch we've seen in Misfits? Let us know. Tweet us at OWL Daily Show or send us an email to overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com. Or, of course, you can leave a comment on YouTube or Twitch. All right, episode 1 is in the books. I hope you all enjoyed the first episode of what is going to be many more to come. The next episode will actually be tomorrow, where I sit down with Andrew ZP Rush and we discuss the successes and challenges of Overwatch League franchising. There's so many people to thank for this first episode. First, thanks to Evan Sweeten, who did the amazing graphic design for the show. Second, a big thank you to Coltrane for the voiceover work. And lastly, a huge thank you to Sideshow, Bren, and Seamoose, and all the other personalities who have agreed to be a part of the Overwatch League Daily family going forward. You can find the show on every podcast outlet. All you have to do is type in Overwatch League Daily, and we're right there. We're also on YouTube. The link is right there in the show notes for you as well. You can find the show on Twitter at OWL Daily Show and myself at KickedTripod. And if you didn't get enough, you can join the ongoing discussion on our Discord at discord.me/OWL Daily Show. Whew. That's it for episode 1. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll see you all tomorrow for episode 2.